So we've painted the broad picture of what it meant to be an executioner's wife, living in that gray zone between useful and unwanted. But history loves giving us a name, a face, a little diary entry, so we can peek inside and see what this life looked like in detail. Enter Frantz Schmidt. Now, if there were ever a celebrity executioner, yes, that phrase exists. Sit would be him. Nuremberg, late 1500s. This guy executed almost 400 people during his career, and flogged, branded, or otherwise punished hundreds more. And he did it all while keeping a diary, because why not document every decapitation like it's a grocery list? Medieval hobbies were wild, but here's the twist. France didn't choose this profession. His father was forced into it. Long story short, one prince had a bad day and decided, hey, you there, you're going to be my new executioner. That one arbitrary order condemned not just a father, but all his descendants to a lifetime of stigma. Thanks, feudalism. Very chill. So by the time France came along, the family was already knee-deep in this hereditary cycle. His wife, a woman named Maria Beck. And here's where we start seeing the familiar pattern, because Maria wasn't exactly free to pick from the cream of society, either. She married into the Schmidt family, and with that, she inherited the whole bloodstained package deal. Now, Maria Beck's life is barely mentioned in the records. Of course it isn't. She was just a wife, tucked into the margins of history. But if we squint at the evidence, we can reconstruct the shadows around her daily existence. She lived in Nuremberg, in a house that was part family home, part grim workshop. Imagine waking up in the morning, putting on your apron, stirring a pot of porridge while your husband sharpens the execution sword in the corner. It's not exactly the kind of domestic scene a medieval painter would immortalize in glowing colors. Maria's role wasn't just to cook and clean. She was also running the secondary side hustle of the Schmidt family. Healing. Remember how executioners doubled as amateur doctors? Frantz was known for it, and Maria would have been right there beside him, preparing poultices, tending wounds, managing the steady trickle of desperate patients who came knocking. So yes, she was the wife of the executioner, but also an unlicensed nurse, unpaid assistant, and permanent manager of social awkwardness. Let's float into one of the more tragic ironies. Frantz Schmidt, for all his grim duties, was actually obsessed with proving his family was respectable. He dressed carefully, went to church, kept a tidy household. He wanted his children to marry into good families, and he wrote letters to city officials begging for recognition as a decent citizen. And yet Maria Beck's social reality would never quite escape the stain. She could walk into church with her head held high, but people would still avoid her touch. She could host guests, but only certain kinds of guests. When her daughters reached marriage age, the cycle continued. Other families hesitated, gossiped, weighed their options. Respectability was always dangling, just out of reach, like a carrot tied to a stick. The tragic comedy of it all. France was eventually granted honorable citizenship by the city. The paperwork literally said, okay, fine, you're respectable now. But this was only after decades of loyal service and only once he was old and near retirement. Which meant Maria spent the prime of her life under the weight of stigma, only to see society grudgingly admit, well, maybe you weren't so bad after all. Now, the Schmidt family wasn't unique. Across Europe, dozens of cities had their own executioner dynasties, and the wives, unnamed, always in the background shouldered the exact same burdens. Take France, for example. The Sanson family became the royal executioners of Paris, stretching across 6 generations. They eventually handled everyone from petty thieves to Louis XVI. Talk about awkward job assignments. But rewind back to the medieval Saxons. Before they became Parisian celebrities, they were just another despised clan, tucked away in a corner of the city. The wives there, same story. Marriage into the family was essentially irreversible. Once you were a Sanson wife, your children were Sansons, your grandchildren were Sansons. You could enjoy the income, but you could never fully step into polite society. The gendered side of this is important. Men like Frantz or Charles Sanson at least had professional recognition. People hated them, but they also feared them. They had visible authority, even if it was tainted. The wives, though, they just got the taint. No authority, no professional recognition, just a stigma without the title. Let's drift to a quieter angle. Domestic chores. It's easy to romanticize medieval wife imagery, spinning, baking, raising children, but for executioners' wives, even the most ordinary tasks had an edge. Take laundry. Executioners often had bloody clothes from their work. Who washed them? Not the town laundress. She wouldn't touch them. That was the wife's job. She scrubbed out stains no one else would handle. Or cooking. Remember, the family often got free meat as part of their contract. Usually, the meat confiscated from criminals or animals killed in punishments. So while other households dined on what they'd raised or bought, the executioner's family was serving up meals with a faint aftertaste of moral ambiguity. Imagine explaining to your kids, "Eat up, darling. Yes, it's perfectly fine. This was a thief's goat." Small details, but they shaped the entire rhythm of daily life. There's also the psychological weight. Imagine your husband is gone all day, sometimes for executions, sometimes for torture sessions, sometimes for medical treatments. He comes home carrying the heaviness of death or the smell of blood. You, as his wife, are expected to be the normalizing presence, to keep the house clean, the children fed, the social ship afloat. No one asked how you felt about it. Some scholars suggest executioners' wives developed a kind of quiet resilience. Others hint at depression, generational trauma, all the heavy words we use today. The truth is, we don't really know. The records don't give us their voices, but the silence itself speaks. They were background figures in a profession nobody wanted to look at too closely. One of the strangest little privileges. Executioner families were often allowed to collect certain perks from their duties. For example, in some cities, they had the right to keep the clothes of executed criminals. Guess who sorted, mended, and repurposed those clothes? The wives. Imagine wearing a cloak that used to belong to a condemned man, because it was simply too valuable to waste. That's some morbid recycling right there. Even weirder, some executioners' wives became small-scale entrepreneurs, reselling those confiscated goods in secret markets. Picture a medieval flea market stall. "Yes, madam, this tunic is gently worn, only executed once." Society might despise you, but it never said no to a bargain. Now, I want to linger for a moment on that image. A wife at market, selling goods, tending to her children, maybe trading herbal remedies. Outwardly, she looked like any other working-class woman, but under the surface, she carried that invisible label, and everyone around her knew it. It's one of history's cruelties, really. We remember the names of the men with swords. We forget the women who kept their households functioning, bore their children, managed the social consequences. Their silence is louder than any diary. But before this gets too heavy, let's gently pivot to the irony that makes it all so medieval. Executioners' wives lived in a bizarre double world. In the morning, you're avoided like the plague. By evening, someone sneaks to your door begging for medical help. In public, you're shunned. In private, you're indispensable. That push and pull defined their existence. And honestly, it's not too far from how medieval society treated women in general. Necessary, but undervalued. Central, but sidelined. It's just that for these women, the contradictions were turned up to 11. Let's slowly wrap this section with one more thought about Maria Beck, the wife of Frantz Schmidt. We don't know her words. We don't have her diary. But we know she raised children who became musicians, healers, respectable citizens. We know she held together a household under one of the heaviest stigmas in Europe. In that sense, she represents all the other wives we'll never know. Women who married into bloodstained dynasties, who mended the fabric of daily life with quiet persistence, who lived in houses at the edge of town, half feared and half forgotten. So when we think of executioners, it's worth remembering. Behind every man with an axe stood a woman with a broom, a basket, and a lifetime of whispered judgments to endure.